says, describe what is meant by the term glycogenolysis. Talk about where it occurs and why it helps with exercise. Finally, list one hormone that we discussed in class that stimulates its release. And of course, as always, I'm not looking for long answers, but I'm looking for you to be able to explain it at a professional level. So the word glycogenolysis just simply means to break down glycogen into what? Into glucose. That's what it means. And that's an easy word to remember. I know it's a big word and you've probably never heard of it before this class, but lysis means to break down, and then the words before that are glycogen. So to break down glycogen, and all glycogen is stored glucose. So when we break it down, we create glucose. Now the reason that we would perform glycogenolysis is because we're trying to deliver glucose either to the muscle so that it can get the energy out of that glucose, or we're trying to deliver that glucose into the bloodstream so that we can raise or at least maintain our blood glucose levels. So obviously this would happen during exercise, but it doesn't just happen during exercise. It happens anytime we need glucose for energy. Remember, the liver glycogen is there to give glucose for the bloodstream so that we can maintain our blood sugar levels. And the muscle glycogen is specifically used whenever the muscle needs energy. So we kind of defined it there. Where it occurs in the liver or it occurs in the muscle tissue. And it helps with exercise by providing glucose, which is needed for energy. One of the hormones, actually almost all the hormones do it. Glucagon is probably one of the biggest hormones that causes glycogenolysis, but so does epinephrine, so does cortisol, and growth hormone as well. So any one of those would be fine. Okay. Anybody have any questions on short answer? Okay, let me have you face down, just pass up your quizzes, and again, if you want to come back and look at them or ask any questions on that, I'm happy to do that. Just have to let me know. Right. So before we left for break, we had temporarily scheduled the next test to be this Thursday. And what I decided over the break is I'm going to move it to Tuesday. And I'm moving it to Tuesday because I want to get far enough into the material that we're going to talk about today. I want to be able to take what we're learning about the energy systems and the hormones and then apply it to how do we prescribe nutrition before, during, and after exercise, which is what we're going to talk about today. And I think we're going to need today, and I think we're going to need Thursday to get far enough along in that. So we will have test number 2 on Tuesday. Same kind of format. The chapters will be Chapter 4, all of Chapter 4, all of Chapter 5, and then what we talk about here with nutrient timing. And this is talked about kind of scattered throughout the book, but you have my notes on this section here. This is from a different book that I recommend you guys get if you're really interested in nutrition and exercise. You can get it online for like $7 or something like that, so it's pretty cheap, but it's a really good book, and it's a great book that coincides with exercise physiology, because when you're reading it, you're going to be like, wow, this is exactly what we learned in exercise physiology. Okay? So that's kind of our game plan, and then once we're done with that test on Tuesday, we've got 2 of the 4 tests done. We have 4 of the 6 quizzes done. We have 2 of the 3 participation grades taken care of, and so after that test, we really don't have a lot of stuff left, but if your grade's not where you want it, you still have 2 tests. So you've got a significant amount of stuff that can bring it back up. We just don't have a lot of time to do that. So if you need help with anything, make sure you let me know. All right? So let's go ahead and kind of pick back up. I'm going to start where we kind of left off last time. And what we're trying to learn here is not just what to eat before, during, and after exercise, but most importantly, why do we need to eat that way? Most people that I work with, when they want to know about nutrition, they don't want to know the why. They just say to me, "Tell me what to eat." You know, and I understand people just want to know what to eat. But to me, if you don't know why to eat that, then it's not that important to you. When you understand why you're supposed to eat a certain way before, during, and after exercise, then you're going to be more likely to eat that way. So the key thing here is to understand why you're eating that way, not just what to eat. So as we said, in this book, they say that muscle is under a 24-hour growth cycle. I'd like you to know what we mean by that. We're saying that muscle isn't just needing nutrients while we're exercising, but it always needs that the muscle tissue is metabolically active. I want you to be familiar with that phrase, metabolically active. We talked about that before. Metabolically active means that muscle is always changing. It's always attempting to grow. It's always attempting to repair. So you can't just supply nutrients to your muscles just when you're exercising or just after exercise. You need to make sure there's a continuous supply of nutrients to your muscles 24 hours a day. And obviously you're not consuming food while you're sleeping, but beyond that, we need to make sure the body has what it needs. And we can break down what muscles need into 3 phases. Definitely want you to know these 3 phases. The energy producing phase, that means what do the muscles need while we're actually exercising. Okay? The recovery phase, that's immediately post-exercise. What do the muscles need? And we're going to say post-exercise is for the 2 hours right after exercise. The most important part is within that first hour after exercise. But for the 2 hours, we'll talk about that as the post-exercise or the recovery phase. And then the third phase is the growth phase. So the growth phase would basically go from 2 hours after exercise all the way to 1 hour before exercise on the next day. So you guys see how that growth phase is going? 2 hours, starting 2 hours post-exercise, all the way around to 1 hour before you're ready to exercise the next day. That's this phase. So obviously this is the longest phase. Okay? So in between training bounds. Now, my experience in doing nutritional counseling with athletes and non-athletes and patients and clients is most people will focus on one of these phases. I have a lot of people that will really pay attention to what they're consuming right before they exercise and during exercise. I have other people that really focus on what they're eating right after exercise. And then I have some people that think about what they should eat throughout the day. But I've never had anybody who focuses on what their body needs during all 3 phases. If you want to optimize performance, you've got to focus on all 3 phases. If you're okay with exercising at 90% of your capability, then fine, just focus on one phase. But if you went to your coach and said, Coach, I'm going to give you 90% today, what would he say to you? You're off the team. Right. So if you want to be 100%, we've got to get people focusing on all 3 phases. Now, I'm not talking about eating perfect, because that's never going to happen. But if we can just slowly, every day, every week, every month, try to improve the way that we're eating, all of a sudden you'll start eating in a way that it's a habit. For me, it is so habit to have what I describe to you guys as breakfast. It's not even an issue. I wake up in the morning, I can't even imagine walking out that door without having that for breakfast, because it's habit for me. I can't imagine working out without having something in my body before I work out, because it's habit. You have to just slowly work that way. It's not going to happen overnight. It might take years to get that way. But you want to get yourself to the point where you're focusing on all 3 phases. So with each of these 3 phases, what we're trying to understand is what is the need during that phase. A great short answer question on this test would be, during the energy producing phase, what is your primary nutritional needs? What are we trying to accomplish with nutrition during this phase? So while we're exercising, the number one, the most important thing that we do is we make sure that our blood sugars stay maintained. Okay, that's the most important thing. As soon as blood sugar drops, fatigue is going to set in, and muscle tissue is going to start being broken down. So we've got to make sure that we're consuming something during exercise to keep our blood sugars stable. And remember, keeping our blood sugar stable is not just what we eat while we're exercising, or I shouldn't say eat, but drink while we're exercising, but what we ate before we went into that exercise bout. If you don't have a meal before a heavy workout, it doesn't matter that you drink Gatorade during your workout, your blood sugars are going to drop. The quicker your blood sugars drop, the quicker fatigue sets in, the quicker performance goes down. The second thing we need to do is not just feed the bloodstream with sugar, but we've got to make sure that the muscle tissue has adequate sugar as well, adequate carbohydrate. So, yes, the blood sugar can be used for the muscle, but the blood sugar is also used for your nervous system, for your brain as well. So the muscle needs to have a supply of sugar, the bloodstream needs to be maintained. Okay, so that's the second purpose for nutrition during this. And again, that means we need to maximize our muscle glycogen stores before we ever even start to exercise.
got to be maximized. And we'll talk about how to do that later. Now, during exercise, fat and protein are really not the important thing. There's no real need to really consume fat or protein right before your exercise. Maybe a little bit of protein can be beneficial, but that's not our purpose. If you're having a protein shake or eating, protein foods before a workout, you're not giving your body what it needs. Because during exercise, what state are we in? Are we in an anabolic state or a catabolic state during exercise? Catabolic. We're in a catabolic state. So whatever you put into your body during exercise is only going to be broken down and used for energy. You supply protein to the body during exercise, it's just going to use it for energy, okay, rather than building muscle tissue. So you don't really need it before. And the other problem that I want you to know with fat and protein right before exercise or even during exercise is it takes longer to digest fat and protein, so we can't get that into our body fast enough. Carbohydrates get digested and absorbed the fastest. So if you need to supply energy to your body right away, it needs to be in the form of carbohydrates. If you add fat and protein to that, you're going to slow down digestion. And also, it's easier to get nutrients into our body when they're in liquid form. You can probably imagine that it's easier to digest a liquid than it is to digest a solid, right? I mean, that should make sense to you. Right? So what we really want to have during exercise is everything in a liquid form. Eating a power bar during exercise, or like if you're playing a sport off the brakes, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it's going to slow down digestion. So liquid's where we want to be. Okay? And then, of course, the third purpose during exercise we've been talking about all semester long is hydration. We've got to make sure that the body stays hydrated. And remember, you can't just start hydrating yourself an hour before exercise. You need to always stay hydrated. So it's not something we need to be thinking about just during the energy-producing phase, but throughout the growth phase as well. Okay? We need to make sure that our muscle glycogen and liver glycogen stores are maximized before a heavy workout. And there's a technique we can use called carbohydrate overloading that we're going to talk about on Thursday. I'll describe how that technique is used. That forces your body, or almost tricks your body, to store more carbohydrate than it normally would. And that's going to be very beneficial for people that are doing very intense, long-duration types of exercise. If you're just going in for an hour workout, there's no need to carbohydrate overload. But if you went into a weekend tournament in soccer, carbohydrate overloading could be beneficial for you because of the amount of energy you're going to need. And then I want to add, we talked about this last class, but a little bit of protein prior to your workout, especially certain amino acids, may be beneficial to help spare your muscle and liver glycogen. And remember what I mean by sparing muscle and liver glycogen. When I say spare carbohydrates, I mean that you allow the body to not have to use those carbohydrates. It can rely on something else. Because we would love to not have to use our carbohydrates, because then our blood sugars would be maintained all the time. That's always the limiting factor. Do I have enough carbohydrate to get through that exercise bout? So anything that forces my body to rely on something other than carbs is going to be a good thing. So a little bit, very small amount of protein could be beneficial, and I'll show you some research on that. And then also some vitamins have been shown to actually not necessarily help during exercise, but help in the recovery phase after exercise. When you exercise at a high level, you get a lot of muscle tissue breakdown. I mean, that's really what we're doing with exercise, is we're breaking the muscle tissue down so that during recovery, we can build that back up stronger than it was before. And when we break tissues down in the body, we produce these structures called free radicals. We probably talk about this in basic nutrition. When you exercise, your body produces free radicals. And free radicals are molecules that cause cell damage. They destroy cells. They're not a good thing. And our body produces structures, and we can get certain structures in our food that fight free radicals. What are those things called that fight free radicals? Antioxidants. Antioxidants. So having some antioxidants in your sports drink during exercise, maybe even a little bit before exercise and post-exercise, may help to destroy those or get rid of those free radicals and that helps muscle to repair faster post-exercise. When we break down our muscle tissue, we want it repaired so that our next workout, we're ready to go. We're 100%. So what are two nutrients that you learned about? Maybe we talked about it last class. Two vitamins that act as antioxidants. Right. Vitamin C and vitamin E. Okay. So you're going to see in a lot of sports drinks nowadays that they add these antioxidants C and E in there, and there are other antioxidants as well, but we'll just focus on these two. And they're putting them in the drinks to help neutralize these free radicals so muscle tissue can repair itself best after exercise. Okay? So by having these free antioxidants in here, we might decrease muscle damage and help to rebuild it faster, recover faster. And by making sure that we have adequate carbohydrate, we decrease cortisol release. We're going to talk about this a lot, but remember, we don't want cortisol to be released during exercise or even post-exercise. Cortisol helps us to keep our blood sugars up, but it helps to keep our blood sugars up by doing what? By breaking down muscle tissue. So what we want to do is we want to use glucagon and growth hormone and epinephrine to keep our blood sugars up rather than cortisol. The higher cortisol levels are, the more muscle breakdown you have. And post-exercise, if cortisol levels are high, think about this for a second. If cortisol levels are high post-exercise, are you going to be able to rebuild muscle tissue while cortisol levels are high? No, because cortisol levels are going to break down muscle tissue. So we've got to make sure cortisol is neutralized during exercise. Now, we are probably going to get, no matter what we do, some cortisol release. We can't stop it, but we want to minimize cortisol release. And how do we minimize cortisol release? Process this information. How do we minimize how much cortisol is going to be released during and post-exercise? Exactly. We make sure our blood sugar levels remain stable, having adequate carbohydrate. You guys understand that? Because what causes cortisol to be released? Low blood sugar. If I keep my blood sugar normal, is cortisol going to get released? No. So the way that I minimize cortisol release is to make sure I'm giving the body adequate carbohydrate, keeping my blood sugar levels up. So if you don't eat before you work out, what's going to happen to cortisol levels? They're going to skyrocket. What's going to happen to muscle breakdown? It's going to skyrocket. What's going to happen to your ability to recover after exercise? It's going to be very difficult to do that. So all those people walking around saying, oh, don't eat before you work out, that way your body burns more fat. A little piece of that is true, but you're not going to get the repairing of the muscles the way that you want. You need to have adequate carbohydrate before and during your workout. Okay? And again, I think we left off on this slide actually. So that's the energy producing stage. Now, the way you guys want to study this is, could you explain to somebody what is the energy producing stage and what do we want to do nutritionally and why do we want to do that? Can you explain why we want to keep cortisol levels down? Why putting antioxidants into the sports drinks during exercise are beneficial? What are the three purposes of the energy producing stage? Make sure you can explain that to somebody. And I guarantee you, even if you went to somebody that's a roommate that's not even health and exercise science, I'm sure they're going to want to know how to eat before exercise. Almost everybody wants to know that. So if you can explain it to somebody, then it means you understand it really well. Okay, so make sure you try to do that. Now, the next stage is the recovery stage, and we can call this the anabolic stage because during the recovery stage, the key goal now is to repair the body from the breakdown that we had during exercise. We want to put our glycogen stores back to where they were. So remember, during exercise, our glycogen stores started to become depleted. We now need to replenish them. And when we replenish glycogen, that's an anabolic process. We're building up. We're taking glucose and building glycogen out of it. Not only are we trying to replenish our liver and our muscle glycogen, but we're also trying to repair our muscle tissue. So what we want immediately post-exercise is to get ourselves into an anabolic stage. I can't get in an anabolic stage if which hormone is skyrocketing after exercise? Cortisol. So I've got to get cortisol neutralized, otherwise I can't replenish. I can't build up. Because cortisol is a very catabolic hormone, and it will cause things to be broken down. So we talked about last class, and based off this chart, we have about a 45-minute window immediately post-exercise where your muscle tissues are very sensitive to replenishing itself and rebuilding itself, especially rebuilding muscle tissue and replenishing glycogen. 45-minute window. And really what happens is exercise, post-exercise I should say, causes your muscle cells to be upregulated. Upregulated means that they work overtime. They work double time. Upregulated means they're working double time. About 45 minutes after exercise, your muscle cells are working double time to replenish glycogen and to rebuild muscle tissue, rebuild damaged tissue. And you can see that the longer we wait after exercise to give our bodies the nutrients to replenish itself, the less and less upregulated those muscle cells are. So by 2 hours post-exercise, your muscle cells are not upregulated at all. They're back down to their normal state of building. So people that work out really hard and then they take a shower, they go watch a little TV, and then they decide to eat, you just missed out on the perfect time to replenish glycogen and to build muscle tissue. And I know a lot of people do that because most people aren't hungry right after exercise. They're not wanting to eat. But do we eat because we feel like it, or do we eat because our body needs those nutrients? Most people eat because they feel like it, right? But we should be eating because our bodies need that. So when athletes or even clients tell me, well, I'm not hungry, I look at them and say, I really don't care whether you're hungry or not. It's just like saying to a coach, well, I really don't feel like doing sprints today. You think your coach is going to care about whether you feel like doing sprints or not? You do the sprints because you need to do those sprints to prepare. Just like you eat post-exercise because your muscles need that energy post-exercise. It's not a question of whether I feel like it or not. Nobody feels like going to practice, or usually you don't feel like going to practice. You do it because you have to do it. It's the same thing with eating. Your philosophy, if you want to maximize performance, isn't I eat because I feel like eating or I don't feel like eating. You eat because your body needs it. My daughter tries to say that to me for breakfast every day. She says, I'm not hungry. I'm doing crap. No, I don't say that. I don't care if you're hungry or not. Your body needs food. You haven't eaten in 10 hours. It needs the food. So it's not a matter of whether you're hungry. Now, she's never going to have a big breakfast because she just doesn't like to eat in the morning time. Something, anything. I don't care what it is, give me something.
I was just going to say, is it better to take like protein at the 15 to 30 minute mark than like right after? Because you're still, it shows that your muscles are still upregulated, higher.
It's going to take a little bit of time to digest. So if I eat it immediately post-exercise, it's probably not getting absorbed for 20 minutes down the road anyway. So I just go right away. But it's not just protein that we need, and we'll take a look at that. So the muscle cells are upregulated, they're working double time, and they are this is a key point, they are very, very sensitive to the hormone insulin. They're very sensitive to insulin. Whereas fat cells are not sensitive to insulin post-exercise. Fat cells are not sensitive to insulin post-exercise, whereas muscle cells are very sensitive. Okay? Now let's go back and look at what does insulin do? What's its function? What does insulin do? It puts glucose into cells. Insulin puts glucose into which cells? All cells. Fat cells, muscle cells, all cells. But because immediately post-exercise, muscle cells are very sensitive to insulin. If you cause insulin to rise immediately post-exercise, then you're going to put that sugar into which cells? Into the muscle cells, which means that sugar's not going into what cells? Fat cells. So the only time you really ever want insulin levels to rise is right after you eat a meal, because we got to lower blood sugar, and right after exercise. Normally, we don't want insulin levels to rise because they will put nutrients into all cells, including the fat cells. But immediately post-exercise, they say, you know what, I'm not going to put it into the fat cell, I'm putting it into the muscle cell. And when I put glucose into a muscle cell after exercise, I can now use that to replenish my glycogen stores. Because remember, I got to work out tomorrow. And tomorrow requires that my glycogen stores are maxed out. So immediately post-exercise, I want my insulin levels to rise. Now, not only does insulin put glucose into cells, it also puts what else into cells? Protein or amino acids into the cells. Most people, when they learn about insulin, they learn that all insulin does is put glucose into cells to lower your blood sugar. You need to recognize it doesn't just put glucose into cells. It also puts fats and amino acids into the cells. If I put amino acids into a fat cell, what's going to happen to those amino acids? They're going to get turned into fat. So it's not beneficial to have a lot of amino acids above what my body needs when I'm not way after exercise. But remember, the muscle cells are very sensitive to insulin right after exercise, so not only will they drive glucose into the muscle cell, but they're going to put amino acids into the muscle cell. And if you put amino acids into a muscle cell after exercise, what's the muscle going to do with those amino acids?
Repair.
Build protein. Repair the muscle tissue first, and then build it stronger than it was. So I can get a much greater anabolic effect. And when I say anabolic effect, I mean replenishing my glycogen stores and rebuilding my muscle tissue if I get my insulin levels high immediately post-exercise. If I get my insulin levels high down here, then where's that glucose and amino acid going to be driven into? The fat cells. I don't want it there. I want it in the muscle cells, so I've got to get insulin levels high immediately post-exercise. What is the best way to get your insulin levels elevated? Eat what? Carbohydrates. I need carbohydrates to get insulin. Insulin rises when we eat protein, but it rises way more when we eat carbohydrates. Now, if I want to get my insulin levels risen as quickly as I can, do I want carbohydrates that take a long time to digest or a very quick time to digest? Quick. So which carbohydrates get digested and absorbed the quickest? Complex carbohydrates or sugar? Sugar does. So what I want immediately post-exercise is pure sugar. And what form do I want it in? Solids or liquids? I want it in liquids. So immediately post-exercise, as you're walking off the field, if you're talking about an athlete, you should be chugging down as much Gatorade, I wouldn't say as much as you can, but chugging down, what I generally say is probably about 20 ounces of Gatorade, because that's going to rehydrate me, and it's going to give me that sugar that raises my insulin levels, so I can drive that sugar into the muscle cells to replenish my glycogen. But I don't want to just give it sugar. What else do I need to give it? Protein. I've got to give some protein too. So the purpose of drinking a Gatorade post-exercise is to make your insulin levels rise so that you can replenish your carbohydrate stores as glycogen, and so you can drive more amino acids into the muscle cells to rebuild muscle tissue. If all you eat post-exercise is pure protein, what's going to happen to my insulin levels if all I have is protein and not carbs?
Rise a little bit.
They won't. Exactly. They won't rise as high. I have lower insulin, and I'll have less chance to drive those things into the cell. So you need a combination of carbohydrates and protein. Okay? And we'll talk about, how much carb, how much protein. Probably get to that more on Thursday. All right? And then again, 2 hours post-exercise, our sensitivity of muscle cells are right back down to normal again. So you have a window here. And this probably, I think, is one of the biggest mistakes that athletes make, is they get done a workout, they spend a half an hour getting back into the locker room, take their shower, they drive to get home, or however they get home, they sit down and watch ESPN for a little bit, and then they decide, I'm going to have something to eat. By that time, you're here, and you just missed out on a perfect opportunity. Yeah.
All this we're going over in that book that...
Yeah. Way more. It's a great book. If you even like this course at all, and you like nutrition and performance, for $7, it's a great book, and you're going to go back over the ATP-PC system, like how you're going to hear it all again. It's a great book. I'll try to remember to bring it in so you can look at it. All right. So that takes us through the energy producing stage and what is the purpose of that stage, the recovery stage and what's happening there. Now let's talk about the growth stage. And as I said, the growth stage runs from 2 hours post-exercise all the way to the hour before your next workout. That's what we're going to consider the growth phase. And during this time, muscles are continuing to grow. Don't think that because we're 2 hours post-exercise, the muscles have stopped repairing themselves. Yeah, they haven't stopped repairing themselves. They're still repairing themselves. They're just not repairing themselves as fast as they were. This is the book, so you can see it's only like 100 pages, and there's a lot of charts in this. So it's an easy book. You know, there are some things in here that if you don't have exercise physiology, you wouldn't understand. But now that you guys have had it, it will make sense to you. It talks about everything I'm talking about in here, you know, hitting these hormones that we've been talking about in these energy systems. Do you remember how much that cost you? I think I bought mine for $10.
Yeah.
Okay, and you can get like used stuff on you know, the online stores for like even less than that, but $10 it's worth it. Okay, so the muscles are still trying to grow, and really we're maximizing growth. And remember, during your sleep, while you're sleeping, what hormone is released the most while you're sleeping? Growth hormone. So we need to realize that while we're sleeping, we're still rebuilding. That's why you sleep, is to repair your body. It needs time so that all your energy can focus on rebuilding itself. That's why we actually sleep. Okay? It's just not happening as fast. So we can't just stop 2 hours post-exercise and say, okay, I did my job. We still need to think about, you know, what am I going to have for dinner? Do I need to have anything later in the day? Hopefully you don't have too much later in the day. You've got to be careful. You don't want to eat too much that you're putting on body fat, because that will be a problem. And we're also working on still replenishing our glycogen stores. Remember, let's say you work out really hard on Monday and you're going to work out hard on Tuesday, part of having a good workout on Tuesday is making sure that your muscle and liver glycogen stores are maxed out. So you can't just stop 2 hours post-exercise. You need to make sure you're ready for that next workout. And what that book talks about is that the timing of these nutrients, when you get this carb, this protein, and those antioxidants, might be more important than what you're actually eating. I would say it's probably equally important. So a lot of people look at nutrition and all they focus on is, what should I eat? I want to take you guys to the level that you're saying, not only do I want to know what I should eat, but I want to know what? Why, yes. I want to know when I should eat, and yes, why I should eat it that way. But it's important to recognize the timing of those nutrients is essential. But I'm glad you guys said why. That's what I want you to really understand. So you can explain it. Because you're going to get, as a health and physical education teacher, you're going to get people asking you all the time about nutrition, all the time. And if all you can say is, well, I think I remember Dr. Byron saying something about eating carbohydrates after exercise, but I can't. You're useless. You just go be a computer teacher if that's all you can remember from exercise physiology. You need to be able to say, I'm going to tell you why. And when they come to you and say, but Muscle and Fitness says I'm supposed to have just pure protein, you can sit and say, the reason you need to have carbs after exercise is what? Increase your insulin levels, and they're going to be, wow, man, this guy knows, or this girl knows what she's talking about here. That's the way you want to be. I don't want you to be a generic health and physical education teacher. I want you to know your stuff inside out. More than anybody in the school, more than the nurse, more than the biology teacher, the chemistry teacher, you guys should by far know more about the human body than anybody. No one should even touch you. Everybody in that school, teachers, administration, students, athletes, should come to you when they want to know something about the body. They should not be going to the science teachers, to the nurse, or to the coaches. They should be coming to you guys because you guys are experts. All right? Okay, now in the book they talk about something called nutrient activation. Definitely want you to understand what we mean by this. So let me kind of touch base on a couple things and then we can kind of define it. realize that muscles are never relying just on one nutrient. There's a tendency for people to think, well, all muscles need is protein. Just give them protein and they'll be happy. That's not the way that it is. Muscles are dependent on many nutrients, receiving many nutrients throughout the day, but receiving nutrients together. So when we say nutrient activation, what we're saying is that some nutrients can make other nutrients more effective. That's probably a good way to kind of define it. Nutrient activation means that some nutrients make other nutrients more effective. Is that what I said, effective? Okay, more effective. And I just gave you an example of that. Protein is great after exercise, but what other nutrient will make protein work better? Carbs. Why will carbohydrates make protein more effective?
Insulin.
Because they raise insulin levels. They will raise glucose, which then raises insulin. So when we say activation, we can basically say that carbohydrates post-exercise will make protein more effective for the muscle. So we need to realize, nutrients don't just work by themselves. They work through interactions with all the other nutrients. So if we can combine the right things together in the right proportion, then we can maximize our nutrition for performance or for health, whatever we're looking at. So muscle metabolism, that means the way the muscles are working, building and being broken down, is driven by a complex interaction not just between protein and carbs, but between carbs, fats, protein, your vitamins, your minerals, your water. There are many minerals that will allow muscle building to occur faster, and vitamins. So when we get focused on a single nutrient, we're not getting the big picture. We need to understand that building muscle and maximizing its performance is dependent on every nutrient working together and being given that nutrient at the right time. The easiest one to think of in terms of nutrient activation is the way simple carbohydrates make protein work. And in this study that's in that nutrient timing book, what they looked at is the effect of amino acids and a carbohydrate mixture on protein synthesis following exercise. Protein synthesis means building protein after exercise. And so here's what you look at. Post-exercise, if you just drink carbohydrate, let's say you have just Gatorade by itself, we get that much protein synthesis. So carbohydrates are good, they're going to help me. If I just consume amino acids post-exercise, well, yep, that helps me too, and that's good. But look what happens when I have a carbohydrate and amino acid mixture post-exercise. Look at protein synthesis. It's almost double. So the combination of carbs and proteins through nutrient activation makes protein synthesis much more effective. It doesn't mean that just carbohydrates are bad for you. They're okay. They will help you. It doesn't mean that just protein by itself is bad for you. It's going to help you. But look at how much more I can get by combining the two together. Yeah. Okay. All right. So we can say that carbohydrates serve as a nutrient activator for protein. And this is not the only example. There are many examples of nutrients working together to give us the effect that we want. This is just one example. So I definitely want you to know what we mean by nutrient activation. I think the word kind of tells you. Nutrients are activating each other. They're making them more effective. And if you just think of this as your example, that should be easy. Okay? Now, the next thing that they talk about is nutrient optimization. And if you're optimizing something, then you're getting the most out of it, is really what you're doing when you optimize. So nutrient optimization means that we're getting the most out of our nutrients. Let's write this down sort of as a definition. We're getting the most out of our nutrients. We're getting the most out of our nutrients by getting the nutrients when we need them. Nutrient optimization says we get the most of our, how did I say that? We get the most out of our nutrients?
Get the most out of our nutrients by getting nutrients
when we need them. So yes, we need protein. Yes, we need carbohydrate. But you can get the most out of them if you eat that carb and if you eat that protein at the right time.
It's not just getting it throughout the day. It's not just like, well, as long as I get my protein and carbs sometime in the day, I'm going to be good. If you want to optimize your nutrition, you got to get it when you're supposed to get it, when you need it. Okay? So an example of that is this. What do we want our cortisol levels to do when we're exercising? We want them to stabilize. They're going to go up a little bit. We just don't want them to go up too much. So the way we keep our cortisol levels kind of stable is to make sure we get adequate carbohydrate before we ever even start exercise and during exercise. So in terms of nutrient optimization, I can optimize my nutrition by making sure that I get the carbohydrate when I need it. So in this case, cortisol is not released. And if cortisol is not released, then I have less protein breakdown. If cortisol is high during exercise, tell me about muscle breakdown. If cortisol is high during exercise, tell me about muscle breakdown. You're going to increase muscle breakdown. Do you want muscle breakdown during exercise? No, you're going to have it no matter what. You just don't want too much of it. And if my cortisol levels are high right after exercise, then can my body repair? It can. It's going to slow it down. So optimization would say make sure you have adequate carbohydrate before, during, and after exercise so that I can suppress cortisol and release what hormone after exercise? Insulin. That's optimizing my nutrition, getting it when I need it.
If your cortisol levels are high like during exercise, but then you eat like you eat what you eat after, is that kind of like you had like muscle working? Like
No,
more muscle breakdown?
no, because it's not a good breakdown. There's two muscle breakdowns. There's muscle breakdown that occurs because you're tearing the muscle because you're straining so hard. That's a good muscle breakdown. That stimulates the body to repair. The muscle breakdown that cortisol is doing is breaking it down to use it for energy. So it's not a stress that would cause it to repair stronger later. That's a good point that you brought up. So no, it's a totally different muscle breakdown. It's a totally negative muscle breakdown. It's not helping me at all. So we are going to have some muscle breakdown during exercise. We just want to minimize that muscle breakdown by keeping cortisol levels low. Okay? The other thing that happens, and I'd like you to know, with cortisol when it gets released, is it has a negative effect on your immune system. It suppresses your immune system. When cortisol levels are high, it suppresses your immune system. So this is a whole different look at nutrition and exercise. Exercise, moderate exercise, actually improves your immune system. Heavy, intense exercise actually breaks down the immune system. But even if I'm doing moderate exercise, which would normally improve my immune system, if cortisol is released at high levels during exercise, it suppresses my immune system, and now I'm going to be more prone to sickness. And how does being sick help your workout? It doesn't. If you're sick and you can't work out, or if you're sick and you're dehydrated, so now your workout is less than what it should be, that hurts your performance as well. So it's kind of an indirect way of thinking about nutrient optimization. I'm not just eating because my muscles need the protein and the carbs, but now I'm eating to strengthen my immune system. Because if my immune system is weak, then that hurts me. And if I believed in knocking on wood, and if this was wood, which it's not, I would knock on wood, but I'll be honest with you, I get sick maybe 2 times a year, and all it is a sniffle. It doesn't even affect my workout, it doesn't affect anything. And I always say to people, if you get sick more than twice a year where you have to stay home and you can't function right, you have a weak immune system. So think about how strong your immune system is. Are you getting more than sick twice a year? And with my family, my whole family, I mean, my kids very rarely ever miss school because they're sick. I actually give them days off because I give them rewards for not being sick, and I give them a free day off just every once in a while. And first of all, I would say we're fortunate and we're blessed that we don't get sick very, very much. But I really believe that our immune system is strong because we're all physically active.
but mostly because we eat relatively well. And let me tell you, we're far from perfect eaters, but we eat relatively well. So, the concept of improving health and performance with nutrition, it's not just about giving the muscle its carbs and its protein, it's about protecting that immune system, okay? You get someone who's sick and they can't play in a game, that's going to kill your team. And that happens because people don't take care of themselves. When I see people sick on a regular basis, the first thing I think of is their nutrition. That's why I asked you, Kevin. I was like, what'd you have for breakfast? And it's great you had a bagel. And that's better than nothing, for sure. But that, to me, is not breakfast. That's a snack that you have. And if you want to maximize your immune system, you have breakfast, you have lunch, you have dinner, you choose healthy snacks throughout the day. And I know that's a strange concept for your generation, but that's really what your body needs. Would you expect your car to take you down to Florida for spring break if you didn't change the oil every once in a while and you didn't put gasoline in it? Then why would you expect your body to function optimally if you don't give it the nutrients that it needs? I see people that spend more time and money on making sure their car runs right. You do some mechanics, right? You probably know some people. I want my car running right, but then they don't take the time to take care of themselves. And it's like, well, how do you expect to perform optimally if you're not giving your body what it needs? You know your car needs what it needs. Why don't you know that you need get the nutrients that you need? We got to get ourselves thinking in that direction. Okay. So if we can maximize our glycogen stores before our workout, if we can consume some carbs, say through Gatorade during our workout, then we minimize cortisol release and during and after exercise, and that will decrease muscle breakdown, and it also will help us to build muscle tissue better during the post-workout phase. Think of how many of you and how many of your friends think like this. I don't eat before I work out or before I go to practice. I'll burn more fat and I'll lose weight. Anybody know anybody that thinks that way? You know lots of people that think that way. It's your responsibility to teach them this.
Even when I try to tell them, they don't listen.
I'm
in the class, I know what I'm talking about. Yeah, I'll do whatever I want.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you brought that up. I've coached for over 20 years. I've played sports for 40 years. I still play sports, and it almost doesn't matter what you say to them. People are going to do what they want to do, and that's fine. But to me, as a coach or a health and physical education teacher, I'm going to tell them what the right thing is to do. Whether they do it or not, that's on them. But don't come crying to me that your legs are tired in the fourth quarter because you decided not to eat something before a game. Because if that happens, you're out. If you can't last, your coaches are going to have sympathy for you in the second half. So I always say to people, you want to maximize performance, you want to get rid of that extra body fat, you want to get faster and get stronger, then you better do what I'm telling you to do. And I would say 90% of the people that I talk to don't do it, but if I can even affect that 10%, I'm happy with that. When I helped coach the field hockey team last summer, I just constantly drilled into them about breakfast because we were having practices at 7 in the morning. I don't expect them to have a big breakfast. I know they're not going to do that, but something. And I would say about 20% of the girls started coming in, and I would say to them, what'd you have? And they said, I had a power bar, or I had a granola, something. So you probably affect people more than you think you do. You're never going to affect everybody. Most people will just turn you off. But you stick to your guns and you do what is the right thing, and then they're going to do what they're going to do, and that's on them. Especially when I'm coaching, if I look at people and they're not drinking Gatorade on the sidelines and they're not having something to eat, I do not want to hear the whining and crying about why you're tired and how you can't keep up. That I will not tolerate. You're not going to take a simple little time to give your body the nutrients that it needs. And that's coaching kids. So imagine coaching high school or college. We already talked about this slide before, how if we don't get adequate carbs, our blood sugar drops, cortisol is released, muscle breakdown is even higher. So I'm not going to put that in there. Okay. This is a research study that, actually, I think it's from another book, so it may not be in there, but there's definitely a chart similar to this. And what this does is looks at what we can do to maximize our glycogen stores before exercise. So people that don't eat enough calories and people that don't get adequate carbohydrate, will have a small amount of muscle glycogen and liver glycogen before their workout. People that eat a typical diet would have about this much muscle glycogen during a workout. But people that really focus on making sure they get adequate carbohydrate immediately post-exercise and then throughout the day can maximize their liver and muscle glycogen stores. And when you maximize your liver and muscle glycogen stores, look what it does to performance. This is a study that looked at cyclists and how long they could ride at a certain intensity, probably like 75% of their VO2 max. How long could they go at 75% of their VO2 max with low muscle glycogen stores on a low carbohydrate diet, on a normal diet, and on a high carbohydrate diet? And for those individuals that consumed a low carbohydrate diet, they were able to ride for 60 minutes and they had to stop. For people in a typical normal diet, they were able to exercise for 100 minutes, about a little over an hour and a half. But people that ate a high carbohydrate diet and focused on their carbohydrate intake immediately post-exercise and throughout the day were able to exercise for 180 minutes at that intensity. So the difference between a high versus a low carbohydrate is almost 3 times more endurance. Or the difference between a typical diet and a high carbohydrate diet is almost double. So you can see that a normal diet is not adequate to maximize your muscle glycogen stores when you're talking about heavy endurance training. We really need to focus on this carbohydrate intake and focus throughout the day. But when is the biggest time that I can replenish my muscle glycogen stores? Right after that workout. If you're not consuming carb immediately post-exercise, you will not maximize your liver and muscle glycogen stores for the next day. And if you're practicing day after day after day, your glycogen stores Monday are here, Tuesday they're here, Wednesday they're here, Thursday they're here, and if game day is here, you're going into game day with inadequate muscle glycogen and liver glycogen, performance is going to drop. So if I'm practicing day after day after day, and it's a pretty intense practice, I'm not sure how intense baseball and softball might be, but certainly soccer's got to be intense practices. So if you don't pay attention to getting that carbohydrate back up again for the next day, you're just going to go down, 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 and then when game day rolls around, you're not going to have what you need, and you can see the effect that it has on performance. All right. Just a little bit more on cortisol here. Remember, no matter what we do, some cortisol is going to be released during exercise. And is cortisol released during short duration exercise or long duration exercise? More longer duration exercise. So if you're just talking about, going in and walking on a treadmill for 20 minutes, if you have any carbohydrate in your diet, you're not going to get a lot of cortisol release. So we're really talking about intense kind of workouts, and we could just I usually just say, to make it easy, is if you're exercising longer than an hour, you really have to pay attention to carbohydrate intake. That's kind of my breakdown. And if it's 45 minutes, it depends on the intensity of the workout. If it's a high intensity, even at 45 minutes, you got to pay attention to your carb intake. But if it's a light workout, less than 45 minutes, I wouldn't worry so much about cortisol. But typically, the body prioritizes its energy as follows, and I would like you to know this. Typically, your body is going to use its carbohydrates first, and as it gets going with exercise, it's going to try to shift more towards fat use. And then if you continue to go, eventually it's going to start to use some protein. Now, you're going to use all three of them during exercise. But typically the body will go carbs, fats, and then proteins if it has to. It's always going to burn a little bit of protein. How much protein we use depends on how intense the workout is and how long it is. But when cortisol levels are high, look what happens to fuel selection. When cortisol levels are high, look what happens to fuel selection. The priority changes. What becomes the number one energy source when cortisol levels are high? Protein. Protein from where?
Muscles.
From your muscle tissue. So if you allow cortisol levels to rise high, we get a switch in our choices of fuels. Now protein becomes number one and fat becomes last. This goes to the people that are skipping meals before they do a heavy workout, thinking they're going to burn more fat as a fuel. There's a piece of that that's true, but you need to let them know they're going to actually burn more protein as a fuel, is what they're going to do. So we've got to have something. Now, when cortisol levels are high, and we start to break down protein, there are specific amino acids that the body loves to use for energy. And I want to talk about these amino acids because you see these sold in supplement stores all the time. You're going to have students come up to you asking you, what are branched-chain amino acids? The GNC guy told me they help me with performance, and so you should know a little bit about them. So I want you to know these amino acids. Remember, amino acids are the building block for protein. And when we use protein, the body's actually going to select these 4 amino acids over all the other ones. These 4 amino acids can go through the process of gluconeogenesis very easily. The other amino acids they can do it, but they're not set up to do that. So glutamine and the 3 branched-chain amino acids are the amino acids that the body will select for energy use during exercise. Okay? Glutamine is the most abundant amino acid that you have in your body. And so your body, when it needs to use protein, will grab any glutamine and use it for energy. And it's pretty effective in doing that. The problem that we do see is when glutamine levels start to drop, which would happen when you use protein as an energy source, that causes cortisol levels to rise. And what do cortisol levels do to your immune system? Decreases your immune system. So you'll see a lot of people supplementing glutamine to tell you that it helps with rebuilding muscle tissue. It helps to spare your carbohydrates, but it also helps to improve your immune system. And it's a little bit of a shaky way to think about it, but supplementing glutamine to help your immune system would be to make sure that you have adequate glutamine during exercise. So what doesn't rise? Cortisol doesn't rise, which suppresses your immune system. So there might be an indirect effect of glutamine supplementation to help out the immune system. It's very indirect. It's really just to supply the body with some amino acids that we can use for exercise so we don't rely on our own glutamine, and cortisol doesn't have to be released. Now, the 3 branched-chain amino acids, and when we use the word branched chain, we're just talking about the chemical structure of that amino acid. That's all that's referring to. There are 3 branched-chain amino acids, and they are all essential amino acids. What does the word essential mean in nutrition?
We don't make it ourselves, if we get it from outside sources.
Exactly. So I want you to know that whenever you use the word essential in nutrition, it means that not only is it important for your body, but your body can't make it itself. It has to come in from the diet, from the foods we eat, or from supplements. We can't make it. So you have 8 essential amino acids that we have to have in our diet, and the rest of the other 12 are non-essential amino acids. We can make them in our body if we want. But the 3 branched-chain amino acids are essential. And I would like you to know those 3 because these are very common supplements that are sold. Remember, your students, even down at the junior high school level, are taking supplements now, and parents are asking all the time, should my son, daughter, supplement and so on. So you should be able to answer those questions. The 3 amino acids are leucine, isoleucine, and valine. The way that I personally remember these 3 as the essential amino acids is by the letters L-I-V, live. That just makes it easy for me to remember. Live, staying alive, they're essential amino acids. I always remember that. Okay? So these are the 3 essential amino acids. So again, what I'm talking about with these amino acids is that these are the amino acids your body loves to use for energy during exercise. And therefore, if we're inadequate in these, that's going to create a problem because cortisol levels are going to rise. And so a lot of people take these amino acids as supplements to enhance performance and protect the immune system. Okay. And again, if this supplementation or making sure we have these amino acids helps to keep cortisol levels down, then we get a greater anabolic effect. But if cortisol levels are rise, then we get less of an anabolic effect. So it's harder to replenish your glycogen and rebuild muscle when cortisol is up. So we want to make sure we keep it down. But ultimately, what's the best way to keep cortisol levels down? Carbohydrates. Okay, this may also help, but carbohydrates are the key. So people, anybody know anybody that's gone on a low protein or high protein, low carb diet? That's very popular. That's great, and it will help you to lose some weight, primarily through losing water weight. But a high protein, low carb diet for an athlete, no way. That is the absolute wrong thing to do. If you go back to that chart where I was talking about performance and endurance with a low carbohydrate diet versus high carbohydrate, you can see we can perform for 3 times longer on a high carbohydrate diet than low. And I know a lot of athletes that are on high protein, low carb diets, and it has some benefit, but in terms of endurance performance, it's the worst thing that you can actually do. Okay? And again, we want to have carbohydrates that we consider high glycemic carbohydrates. And I want you to be familiar with that phrase, high glycemic. High glycemic means that is a food that causes your blood sugar levels to rise very rapidly. Low glycemic carbs are foods that don't allow your sugars to rise very quickly. So during exercise and immediately post-exercise, do I want sugars to get absorbed quickly during exercise? Yes. During exercise, I want it because I need that energy. Post-exercise, I want them absorbed quickly so I can get insulin to go up. So the carbohydrates we're looking for immediately before exercise and during exercise and post-exercise are carbohydrates that are high glycemic carbohydrates that will make my blood sugars rise very quickly. Now, think about during the rest of the day, during the growth phase, beyond exercise, outside of exercise, if I consume high glycemic carbs, is that going to be a good thing for me or a not so good thing for me? It's going to be a not so good thing because what's going to happen if I'm outside of exercise time?
Store fat.
Right. Insulin's going to rise, and that sugar's going to go right into the fat cells. So typically, we want to have low glycemic carbs throughout the day so that we don't get a big rush of insulin. We don't want that. But during exercise and post-exercise, we want those high glycemic carbs. And high glycemic carbs are going to be found in things like Gatorade. Gatorade, Powerade, your sports drinks probably allow you to absorb that sugar faster than anything else. Okay? Complex carbohydrates, things that have a lot of fiber in it, if you consume that right before exercise, it's going to slow down how quickly sugar gets into the cells. If we add fat and protein into a pre-workout meal, what's that going to do to the absorption of sugar?
Even slower.
Slow it down. So I'm not saying you can't have any fat or any carbs or any protein, but you want to minimize that before exercise because we need those carbs in there quickly. Okay? And this is that same study before looking at protein synthesis with carbs and amino acids. Okay? This is looking at protein synthesis or protein breakdown, protein synthesis, and the net balance. You can see that after exercise, we are still, no matter what we do, we're going to be breaking down some muscle because there is some cortisol release. But while we're breaking down some muscle, we're building other muscle. So during or right after exercise, not only are you breaking down muscle, but you're building muscle. And what ultimately matters post-exercise is the net effect. The net effect is, are you overall increasing protein or decreasing protein? So just to repeat that, after exercise, you are still breaking some muscle tissue down, but you're also building some muscle tissue. What we want to have happen is we make sure that we're building more than we're breaking down. That's what we want to have. So the net effect is what matters to us. Ultimately, what happens there. And this is looking at a carbohydrate protein mixture. If we give it to the person immediately after exercise is over versus waiting 3 hours after exercise. And the only one I really even want you to look at is here is the net effect, because that's really ultimately what matters. If you give a person the carb-protein mixture immediately post-exercise, we get this much increase in protein synthesis. But if we wait 3 hours to get our meal after that window of time, we actually have a net breakdown of protein. So waiting too long to replenish that carb and that protein can actually be a negative thing. Now that's a net decrease in protein. I would probably look at it this way. If you're going to wait for 3 hours, it's not like it's bad for you, but you're missing out on a lot of muscle tissue repair that could be going on. So there's a big difference, not just what we eat, but when we eat them. We need to get that as quickly as we can. If you wait to the 3 hours, you just missed out on that opportunity. Okay? Let me just take a second here, and I just want to look at 1 or 2 more slides, but let's just slow down for a second, and let me have you look at your notes. Let me have you just think about some of the things that I'm saying, and a good way to learn this stuff is to think about, what do you do? Everybody in here exercises? I'm sure everybody exercises to some extent. Think about how you think about your nutrition while you're exercising. Most people that exercise don't even think about their nutrition. They act like exercise is here and nutrition is here, like they don't have anything to do with each other. So we eat when we feel like it, we exercise when we feel like it. We never think about, maybe it would be a good idea to make sure I eat, at a certain time when I'm exercising. So think about how you look at your nutrition. Are you a person that says, I'll eat when I feel like it, but I'm not going to eat and worry about it? Most people are that way. So if you're that way, I understand. I'm going to try to change that this semester. Or are you a person that says, no, I really pay attention. I really think about what I should have before my workout. But think about those things. Look at your notes and see if there's any questions you have, any comments you have, anything you've heard from other people or you've read in magazines or things that you've experienced that we could maybe answer based on some of the things we're talking here before I hit these last couple slides. Any questions, comments you guys have? Yeah, Mike?
Well, I've heard that you're not supposed to eat 2 hours before you exercise. You're not supposed to eat right before you exercise. Is that any reason other than making you sick?
Yeah, we're going to actually lay it out for you on Thursday a little bit. How would we break it down? In terms of having a full meal, I would certainly say it needs to be an hour before you exercise, because when you have a meal, you're going to have protein, you're going to have fat in there, and that really slows down digestion. So if I eat a half an hour before I go work out, that stuff's probably not even getting absorbed before my workout's over. So having it 2 hours prior would be great. But then I probably need to have something within the hour before I exercise. Within that hour before exercise, what I'm trying to do is just kind of maximize my carbohydrate before I'm ready to work out and maximize my hydration before I work out. So what would be a good, really, within an hour pre-workout meal to have? What should I have? I have a big lunch at 12. I train at 2. What should I have like that half hour, 45 minutes before I work out? What would you recommend to your clients?
Wheat bread?
Okay, bread could be okay because that gets absorbed relatively quickly, but what would be more simple than that? Gatorade. Because I need the hydration, and the Gatorade is going to give me those carbohydrates that I'm going to need. That's going to be the quickest way. The closer I get to my workout, the more easily I need it absorbed. That's why I want to go to the Gatorade. If I was an hour out, wheat bread would probably be an okay thing. But when I'm within that half an hour, now I need to really focus on hydration. Any other questions, comments?
Another thing, recovery thing, I don't get why muscle is so good.
Yeah, I don't even know the physiology behind that, but remember, every cell has receptors on it, and sometimes those cells become extra sensitive, so that when insulin is released, those receptors respond over time. They just work faster than they normally would, and so when insulin attaches to them, they allow more glucose and more amino acids than they normally would. They just become sensitized to insulin. They're upregulated. They just work faster. I'm trying to think of an analogy that would help you to understand that. I don't know what it is about exercise that causes that, but it just happens. Remember we said that during exercise, do you need insulin to get sugar into the cell? No. There's something with exercise that changes those receptors so that glucose can get in there easier. And then when you're not exercising, then you do need insulin to get it in there. So I'm not sure what it is, but the sensitivity of those receptors changes. In terms of sensitivity, think about it this way. If Mike was super, super sensitive to touch, and I hit him in that arm, how would he respond? He'd freak out on me. If he was not very sensitive and I hit him in the arm, he'd go, what was that? Right? So that's like the way the cell receptors are. When they become really sensitive to exercise, you give it a little bit of insulin, and those gates open, wide open for protein and for glucose to get in. I'd have to look way into the cell membrane stuff, which is beyond my understanding, to know exactly why that's happening. Good question. Okay, let me just finish with this thing here. Remember, we're talking about what do we want to have happen to cortisol during exercise? Minimize it. It's going to be released somewhat. We want to minimize it. So how can I minimize it? Making sure I have plenty of sugar. Look at the difference between cortisol release if during exercise all I consume is water versus during exercise I get something like Gatorade or Powerade. Very minimal increase in cortisol levels when I drink Gatorade, Powerade. Very high increase in cortisol levels when I drink just water, because water's not giving me that sugar to suppress cortisol. So again, if it's an intense workout, you really need to be consuming Gatorade or some form of sports drink. Water is not adequate during intense workouts. If you're talking about just a half-hour little workout, water's going to be fine. But when you're talking about performance and you're working at probably for an hour or more of intense exercise, you really need to supplement here. And I'll just end on this, and that's the biggest problem that I see is with female athletes. They almost refuse to consume sports drinks during exercise because in their mind, there's sugar in there, it's going to make me fat if I do that. And so you really have to find a way to talk to them about why it's so important to have some Powerade or Gatorade versus just water. That's a big issue that you have to deal with. I don't run into that so much with guys, but I really run into that with females. So that's an issue you have to address. Let's stop on this, and then on Thursday we'll pick up. You guys need help with anything? We'll see you let me know.
I forget what your name is, Matt.
Bananas for free?
Yeah.
They're kind of slower digesting, aren't they?
Not too slow. If you look up index on bananas, it would tell you how quickly it gets absorbed. But that would be fine. That would be probably a little bit slower than the banana because there's fiber in it. But again, those would be good things.
That's the hour window probably?
Yeah, within the hour. If I'm getting towards a half an hour, that's where I really go to the drink.
Another question. Cortisol levels are high, free radicals are reduced, right?
That's not exactly what we were saying. We were saying that free radicals are produced during exercise, no matter what you do.
Not in regards to cortisol levels?
Probably a little bit more. I would say yes. I would say yes because you're going to get more muscle breakdown, and that may produce some more free radicals. But what we were just saying is exercise is called free radical production, therefore antioxidants are beneficial.
Okay.
I would agree with that statement though. I would bet, I don't have proof on it, but I would bet that elevated cortisol could cause more of that.
And that was molecules that break down muscle tissue.
All tissue, it's called cell damage.
All tissue. Also another question. Slides. Do you post them online?
No, because these are all copyrighted. If you want to get to those, what I would do is just get that book.
I'm actually going to.
And then all of these are in that book.
All right.
And
you gotta know exercise fits, but it's a great
Well,
tool.
yeah,
And you write it off on your business, like here,
Nice.
you write everything off.
Yeah. The personal training, ISA training, it was all explained to me in the book, but I'm a more of an interactive type of person. So I read it, now I learn it.
Oh, yeah.
During the course, you know,
You have to apply this stuff.
Oh,
Really, every workout you do for yourself or your client, you should be going through saying, and this.
Right.
Otherwise, you'll.
That's why I'm able to live it and learn it.
Yeah.
Now I can go and
Yeah.
get anything at
Yeah.
once.
Absolutely.
One other question I had, would you recommend like glutamine powder in Gatorade, like during and after?
I don't have any problems with it. I don't know how much. I'm fine with it. I don't have a problem with it at all. I wouldn't. I'm not big on the glutamine and the branched chain amino acids
I'm not either.
because if you're eating a normal diet, you're getting plenty of those amino acids. But there is some research to suggest it could be a benefit. So if people want to do it, I have no problem. Certainly not going to hurt you. So there could be a
branched
benefit.
chains too, as far as pill form afterwards, not as essential.
I'm more thinking of before and during because by the time they get digested, you're beyond that window.
Right, okay.
So if you had a sports drink that added glutamine and branched chain amino acids in there, that's probably a good thing there.
So you found the capsule with branched chains and popped it in there?
I don't know exactly how that would work, how effective that would work. I would look to see if I could find a sports drink that had that in there already, because then it would be mixed in the way that would probably be beneficial. You could go with that for people that are really into supplementation and stuff like that. You could go with that.
I try not to encourage it because a lot of it's not even FDA regulated.
Yeah.
Not that the FDA does the job right now, but.
Yeah. I would focus way more on what they're eating than worry about supplements. The only supplement that I would actually say is whey protein after the
No
workout.
casein, like at night casein protein?
I'm okay with it. I just would be careful just making sure you're getting it in your diet would be better. I would be careful that if you're consuming casein protein like before you go to bed at night, is that going to be stored as fat in your body tissue? So if you have someone who's trying to lose body fat, just be careful about extra calories going into that.
All right, great. Thanks for your time.
All right, yep, no problem.
How about Alex? Alex,